Prelude. We each have our own journey towards awakening and ultimately to self-realization, though it is ever here. It is simple to awaken, just a little step back from thinking processes, and there's a radical shift in perception. And with this dynamic turn of attention, you have a chance of living in truth and freedom. There are obviously varying depths of awakening. In the story below, the Master Hakuin has a radical spiritual practice which becomes all-consuming. And in Buddhism, when the veil drops over the eye covering, the false persona dims or falls away, this is called satori, a kind of sudden seeing of one's true nature, or the arrival of authentic knowledge. The light that always shines is no longer veiled and rushes in. Meister Eckhart, the 12th century Christian mystic, called this a lightning flash. Satori often comes after rigorous meditation practice or deep inquiry and devotion, the unrelenting quest for the truth and the absolute, and it has ignited a fire of illumination. In the yogic tradition of India, this unveiling often happens through what is called Shaktipat, where the psychic barrier falls away and the divine energy manifests in us. The mind overlay collapses and a portion of our accumulated karma and latent tendencies of mind is dissolved, allowing us to see through the eyes of purity and divine vision, even if not in complete abidance. In the yogic tradition, the spiritual energy transmission usually takes place between disciple and guru, sometimes from great distances, but this energetic relay can happen at any moment to anyone, regardless of circumstances. This dropping of the veil and arrival of bliss is an act of grace. Now, grace is always pouring forth from the absolute consciousness, God or true self. But most of humanity has, symbolically speaking, loads of soot and mud plastered over them from various forms, hampering the full expression of their innate divinity. Grace is never absent, never lacking. The idea of an individual or limited I is not the truth. Any moment we can attune to this ever-pouring grace by making ourselves grace-prone through loving devotion or inquiry, by turning inward and connecting with intuition and wisdom with full awareness. This surrender of persona or individuality unleashes an immensity of love, allowing grace full expression in our lives. Zen Sickness by Zen Master Hakuin Ekaku Zenji. This is in the early 1800s when it was written. On the day I first committed myself to a life of Zen practice, I pledged to summon all the faith and courage at my command and dedicate myself with steadfast resolve to the pursuit of the Buddha way. I embarked on a regimen of rigorous austerities, which I continued for several years, pushing myself relentlessly. Then one night, everything suddenly fell away, and I crossed the threshold into enlightenment. All the doubts and uncertainties that had burdened me all those years suddenly vanished, roots and all, just like melted ice. Deep-rooted karma that had bound me for endless ages to the cycle of birth and death vanished like foam on water. It's true, I thought to myself, the way is not far from man. Those stories about the ancient masters taking 20 or even 30 years to attain it, someone must have made them up. For the next several months, I was waltzing on air, flagging my arms and stamping my feet in a kind of witless rapture. Afterwards, however, as I began reflecting upon my everyday behavior, I could see that the two aspects of my life, the active and the meditative, were totally out of balance. No matter what I was doing, I never felt free or completely at ease. I realized I would have to rekindle a fearless resolve and once again throw myself life and limb together into the Dharma struggle. With my teeth clenched tightly and eyes focused straight ahead, I began devoting myself single-mindedly to my practice, forsaking food and sleep altogether. Before the month was out, my heart fire began to rise upward against the natural course, parching my lungs of their essential fluids. My feet and legs were always ice cold. They felt as though they were immersed in tubs of snow. There was a constant buzzing in my ears as if I were walking beside a raging mountain torrent. I became abnormally weak and timid, shrinking and fearful in whatever I did. I felt totally drained, physically and mentally exhausted. Strange visions appeared to me during waking and sleeping hours alike. My armpits were always wet with perspiration. My eyes watered constantly. I traveled far and wide, visiting wise Zen teachers, seeking out noted physicians, but none of the remedies they offered brought me any relief. Then I happened to meet someone who told me about a hermit named Master Hakuin, who lived inside a cave high in the mountains of the Shirakawa district of Kyoto. He was reputed to be 370 years old. His cave dwelling was 2 or 3 leagues from any human habitation. He didn't like seeing people, and whenever someone approached, he would run off and hide. From the look of him, it was hard to tell whether he was a man of great wisdom or merely a fool, but the people in the surrounding villages venerated him as a sage. Rumor had that he had been the teacher of Ishikawa Jozan, and that he was well versed in astrology and deeply learned in the medical arts as well. People who had approached him and requested his teaching in the proper manner, observing the proprieties, had on rare occasions been known to elicit a remark or two of enigmatic import from him. After leaving and giving the words deeper thought, the people would generally discover them to be very beneficial. In the middle of the first month of 1710, or 1810 I think it is, I shouldered my travel pack, slipped quietly out of the temple in eastern Mino, where I was staying, and headed for Kyoto. On reaching the capital, I bent my steps northward, crossing over the hills at Black Valley and making my way to a small hamlet at the White River in Shirakawa. I dropped my pack off at a tea house and went to make inquiries about Master Hakuin's cave. One of the villagers pointed his finger toward a thin thread of rushing water high above the hills. Using the sound of the water as my guide, I struck up into the mountains, hiking on until I came to the stream. I made my way along the bank for another league or so until the stream and the trail both petered out. There was not so much as a woodcutter's trail to indicate the way. At this point, I lost my bearings completely and was unable to proceed another step. Not knowing what else to do, I sat down on a nearby rock, closed my eyes, placed my palms before me in gasso, and began chanting a sutra. Presently, as if by magic, I heard in the distance the faint sounds of someone chopping at a tree. After pushing my way deeper through the forest trees in the direction of the sound, I spotted a woodcutter. He directed my gaze far above to a distant sight among the swirling clouds and mist at the crest of the mountains. I could just make out a small yellowish patch, not more than an inch square, appearing and disappearing in the eddying mountain waterfall vapors. He told me it was a rushwork blind that hung over the entrance to Master Hakuin's cave. Hitching the bottom of my rope up into my sash, I began the final ascent to Hakuin's dwelling. Clambering over jagged rocks, pushing through heavy vines and clinging underbrush, the snow and frost gnawed into my straw sandals, the damp clouds thrust against my robe. It was very hard going, and by the time I reached the spot where I had seen the blind, I was covered with a thick, oily sweat. I now stood at the entrance of the cave. It commanded a prospect of unsurpassed beauty, completely above the vulgar dust of the world. My heart trembling with fear, my skin prickling with goose flesh, I leaned against some rocks for a while and counted out several hundred breaths. After shaking off the dirt and dust and straightening my robe to make myself presentable, I bowed down, hesitantly pushing the blind aside, and peered into the cave. I could make out the figure of Master Hakuin in the darkness. He was sitting perfectly erect, his eyes shut. A wonderful head of black hair flecked with bits of white reached down over his knees. He had a fine, youthful complexion, ruddy in hue like a Chinese date. He was seated on a soft mat made of grasses and wore a large jacket of coarsely woven cloth. The interior of the cave was small, not more than 5 feet square, and except for a small desk, there was no sign of household articles or other furnishings of any kind. On top of the desk, I could see 3 scrolls of writing, the Doctrine of the Mean, Lao Tzu, and the Diamond Sutra. I introduced myself as politely as I could, explained the symptoms and causes of my illness in some detail, and appealed to the master for his help. After a while, Hakuin opened his eyes and gave me a good hard look. Then, speaking slowly and deliberately, he explained that he was only a useless, worn-out old man, more dead than alive, he said. He dwelled among these mountains, living on such nuts and wild mountain fruit as he could gather. He passed the nights together with the mountain deer and other wild creatures. He professed to be completely ignorant of anything else and said he was acutely embarrassed that such an important Buddhist priest had made a long trip expressly to see him. But I persisted, begging repeatedly for his help. At last, he reached out with an easy, almost offhand gesture and grasped my hand. He proceeded to examine my 5 bodily organs, taking my pulses at 9 vital points. His fingernails, I noticed, were almost an inch long. Furrowing his brow, he said with a voice tinged with pity, "Not much can be done. You have developed a serious illness. By pushing yourself too hard, you forgot the cardinal rule of religious training. You are suffering from meditation sickness, which is extremely difficult to cure by medical means. If you attempt to treat it by using acupuncture, moxibustion, or medicines, you will find they will have no effect, not even if they were administered by a master. You came to this grievous pass as a result of meditation. You will never regain your health unless you are able to master the techniques of introspective meditation. Just as the old saying goes, when a person falls to the earth, it is from the earth that he must raise himself up. Please, I said, teach me the secret technique of introspective meditation. I want to begin practicing it and learn how it's done." With a demeanor that was now solemn and majestic, Master Hakuin softly and quietly replied, "Ah, you are determined to find an answer to your problem, aren't you, young man? All right, I suppose I can tell you a few things about introspective meditation that I learned many years ago. It is a secret method for sustaining life known to very few people. Practiced diligently, it is sure to yield remarkable results. It will enable you to look forward to a long life as well." Master Hakuin's butter pill meditation. What you must do is cut back on words and devote yourself solely to sustaining your primal energy. Hence, it is said, those who wish to strengthen their sight keep their eyes closed. Those who wish to strengthen their hearing avoid sounds. Those who wish to sustain their heart energy maintain silence. You mentioned a method in which butter is used, I said. May I ask you about that? Master Hakuin replied, when a student engaged in meditation finds that he is exhausted in body and mind because the 4 constituent elements of his body are in a state of disharmony, he should gird up his spirit and perform the following visualization. Imagine that a lump of soft butter, pure in color and fragrance, and the size and shape of a duck egg, is suddenly placed on the top of your head. As it begins to slowly melt, it imparts an exquisite sensation, moistening and saturating your head within and without. It continues to ooze down, moistening your shoulders, elbows, and chest, permeating lungs, diaphragm, liver, stomach, and bowels, moving down the spine through the hips, pelvis, and buttocks. At that point, all the congestions that have accumulated within the 5 organs and the 6 viscera, all the aches and pains in the abdomen and other affected parts, will follow the heart as it sinks downward into the lower body. As it does, you will distinctly hear a sound like that of water trickling from a higher to a lower place. It will move lower down through the lower body, suffusing the legs with beneficial warmth until it reaches the soles of the feet where it stops. The student should then repeat the contemplation. As his vital energy flows downward, it gradually fills the lower region of the body, suffusing it with penetrating warmth, making him feel as if he were sitting up to his navel in a hot bath filled with a decoction of rare and fragrant medicinal herbs that have been gathered and infused by a skilled physician. Inasmuch as all things are created by the mind, when you engage in this contemplation, the nose will actually smell the marvelous scent of pure soft butter. Your body will feel the exquisite sensation of its melting touch. Your body and mind will be in perfect peace and harmony. You will feel better and enjoy greater health than you did as a youth. At this time, all the undesirable accumulations in your vital organs and viscera will melt away. Stomach and bowels will function perfectly. Before you know it, your skin will glow with health. If you continue to practice the contemplation with diligence, there is no illness that cannot be cured, no virtue that cannot be acquired, no level of sagehood that cannot be reached, no religious practice that cannot be mastered. Whether such results appear swiftly or slowly depends only upon how scrupulously you apply yourself. He continued, I was a sickly youth, in much worse shape than you are now. I experienced 10 times the suffering you have endured. The doctors finally gave up on me. I explored hundreds of cures on my own, but none of them brought me any relief. I turned to the gods for help, prayed to the deities of both heaven and earth, begging them for their subtle, imperceptible assistance. I was marvelously blessed. They extended me their support and protection. I came upon this wonderful method of soft butter contemplation. My joy knew no bounds. Immediately, I set about practicing it with total and single-minded determination and devotion. Before even a month was out, my troubles had almost totally vanished. Since that time, I've been the least bit bothered by any complaint, physical or mental. I became like an ignoramus, mindless and utterly free of care. I was oblivious to the passage of time. I never knew what day or month it was, even whether it was a leap year or not. I gradually lost interest in the things the world holds dear, soon forgot completely about the hopes and desires and customs of ordinary men and women. In my middle years, I was compelled by circumstances to leave Kyoto and take refuge in the mountains of Wakasa province. I lived there nearly 30 years, unknown to my fellow men. Looking back on that period of my life, it seems as fleeting and unreal as the dream life that flashed through Li Sheng's slumbering brain, a famous master of the time. Now I live here in this solitary spot in the hills of Shirakawa, far from all human habitation. I have a layer or two of clothing to wrap around my withered old carcass. But even in midwinter, on nights when the cold bites through the thin cotton, I don't freeze. Even during the months when there are no mountain fruits or nuts for me to gather, and I have no grain to eat, I don't starve. It is all thanks to this contemplation. Young man, you have just learned a secret that you could not use up in a whole lifetime. What more could I teach you?